Hey, just a reminder, I guess I can't swear. And on top of that, Zoom is invested in everything I say to train their AI. Oh boy, they're gonna regret that. I was just gonna say something else. Is anyone else speaking?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, man.
You got like 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay. I was like, I hate to disappoint you. Well, thank you, Ionic, for having me. And this is like just kind of an idea I had. I was in California, and I was like, oh man, React Rally's coming up, and it's pretty close. So I was like, maybe I should just fly over there and just hang out. But then I noticed Ionic was one of the lead sponsors, and I reached out to Mike, who's not here. Shout out, Mike. And I'm like, dude, you're gonna be there? Like, let's do something together, whatever. And he's like, oh, dude, I won't be there, but let me connect you with the team. Boom. So thank you for everyone for making this work. I'll get right into it. Now, I'm very like laissez-faire, as we say in the fine language from that Molière likes. So this is gonna be very conversational. I'm gonna have a little fun. I'm a sports fan, so I'll just leave it at that right now. So first of all, if this works, okay, give me a quick second. It was working 10 seconds ago. Come on. Why is this not working? Give me a second, folks. Hold up. Maybe I'll just disconnect this again and reconnect. It literally worked 2 seconds ago. All right, we're connected. All right, arrows it is. Oh, you are correct. Hold on, hopefully that worked. Yes, it did. Thank you. Thank you. Whoever said that. So I'm definitely glad to be back in Salt Lake. As I was saying, I've never been to Salt Lake until like 22 in March or something like that. And it's like my third time here since then. So it's very bizarre. But like I said, I'm glad to be back in Salt Lake, or what we call at work, GCE US West 3. Because that's literally one of our zones. And I just thought that was hilarious when I saw it once in our docs. I was like, that's so funny. But like I said, I'm kind of a sports fan. I'm also a bit of a runner. And, I tend to sort of like, especially this time of year, it's like, I don't know if there are any runners here, but the Diamond League is on. Budapest World Championships are starting in like 2 days. So I'm just really keen. So I try to remind folks that, sports and even performance, because that's what I'm going to talk about a bit today, there is a bit of a correlation. And, a lot of people are like, really? And, I really do remind them that there is a connection between sports and performance. And, I'm a runner, and I recently ran, anyone familiar with this company called Tracksmith? No big deal, but they're like distance running. They're like this elitist distance running kind of company, but I ran anyways. They had this thing called a 5,000, Twilight 5,000. So I ran it recently. Felt all right, but these were sort of like some of the metrics that I had. It was a 5,000 meter distance. That was my time. My pace was 4:04, believe it or not. Cadence, stride length, average speed. These are all metrics that I tend to look at afterwards. But the one I really kind of keen in on is my pace, because especially at a 400 meter oval, I'm always kind of locked in. I'm like, yeah, I have to do this 96-second lap, and I'm trying not to, veer off it. But, metrics are about performance, and to an extent, performance is about a lot of the metrics. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over like performance conversations, and I'm going to deep dive into some numbers for fun, because again, when you start to talk about performance and metrics, it's really about crunching some numbers. So I want to welcome everyone to a fake ESPN logo, but we're going to run through some performance data. And in the web performance space that I occupy, we tend to really just look at data all the time. Data will inform you on what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, and what you can improve ultimately. So that being said, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Henri. French is my mother tongue, believe it or not. You can find me on all socials at Henri Helvetica, even Mastodon. I work at this amazing company called Catchpoint, where we tend to look at a lot of things, including performance. And I work specifically on this one solution we have called Web Page Test, a open source tool that we acquired a couple of years ago, which is, I personally feel like the Cadillac of web performance, but you're hearing that from me. The title that I have is developer community, but I tend to sort of look at a lot of different things. So for sure, I hang out with developers, see what they're up to, talk about performance, because that's something that's certainly growing in importance. And I'll talk about that wise in a few. And I'm from the greatest city on the planet, which is Toronto, Canada. Believe it or not, there is a Toronto, Kansas. So I just want to make sure that there is. I was just like, what is going on there? And as I mentioned, I'm a bit of a distance runner. Last few years, I've been using this hashtag called devs who run. I really did it just to encourage developers to sort of like be active, not necessarily like go out and run all the time, but there is some benefit to that because we're behind computers all the time, sitting, et cetera, et cetera. So today, like I said, it's going to be a bit of a snapshot of performance. I could have made this like an hour long, but I really want to just give people an idea of kind of like what's going on in the space in a way that we can sort of like understand, but also I'll give you a little bit of a deeper dive into some stuff that we do personally. And I'm going to talk about core web vitals, and I think they're pretty important in the sense that I've been hanging around the performance space for a little while. And I remember once upon a time, maybe about 6 years ago, when I said like, hey, I'm in performance, and people were like, oh, cool, like dance, or, no, literally, I've done that before. And I'm like, no, like web performance. Like, oh, okay. No one really paid too much attention. But I remember this one time I was at a performance conference, the only one we have. And I remember being on stage and saying that someone asked me, it's like, what do you think is, a significant moment in performance or something we could look forward to? And by the way, should I be standing in front of a mic or something? Because I know this is being recorded and I see a speaker.
It's just you now. It's the mic on your.
Oh, okay, my bad. Okay, so I'll stand in front of it then. I actually said that I think Lighthouse had a significant impact in terms of getting people going. But the big deal was, I think, when Core Vitals were introduced, because essentially they're like, listen, we understand, performance is complicated and you might want to be sort of literate in the space. We're not asking you to deep dive, but, look at these few little metrics. So Core Vitals turned 3 this year, and I think they really opened up the tent. So you had a lot of different people coming in, sort of like poking around. And now they're asking us like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about some performance. So we're going to cover a little bit of that. And for those not familiar with Core Vitals, and I realize we have some recent grads, some current students, and et cetera, shout outs. Core Vitals, it's really an initiative to provide unified guidance for quality signals that are essential to delivering a great user experience on the web. And at the end of the day, performance is about user experience. When you have a slow app, it's a bad user experience. When you have stuff jumping around the page, it's a bad user experience. When things aren't loading as fast as they should, that's a bad user experience. So ultimately, the big picture, you can sum it up by talking about core vitals, and we're going to look at a few in particular. Now, when we talk about vitals, we talk about things like visual completeness. When the page is loading, is it coming together in a way that we can start to understand what's happening on the page? We talk about that. We also talk about page stability. Like I said, pages that jump around are not fun. Now, I'm going to share a bit of a personal experience. I've been looking for a car lately. I don't need one, but I kind of miss driving, I'll be honest. I used to be in this business where I needed one, and when I left that industry and I was like, what do I do with this? It was just sitting there. I was like lending it to friends. And so I got rid of it. But anyways, I feel like driving again. And by the way, I feel like driving a manual transmission car because they're disappearing. And I'm a big fan. But I go to this one website called Auto Trader, and the Canadian one, honestly, whenever I like hit enter, I literally sit back and wait for it to load and settle down because the page jumps around so much. I'm just like, let me just get a coffee, I'll come back. You know what I mean? So page stability is a big deal. It's part of the user experience. And obviously, you know, we're at React Rally, you know, JavaScript. It's about interactivity, and that is extremely important on the web. You know, we are here today because of it. And but you know, the interactivity we've been trying to create has come at a cost as well. So we're going to talk about that. Now, a lot of the data I'm going to pull is going to come from this website right here. Well, I don't even know if it's called a website. Core Vitals Tech Report. And it's an opportunity. So there's this website called, or this kind of repo called the HTTP Archive. Anyone familiar with that? Okay. Basically how the web was built, right? You can sort of do, there are like 3 books that are published based on the HTTP Archive, just looking at the web, you know, these very interesting finds. And we also have the Core Web Vitals Tech Report, where we look at vitals per frameworks, per technologies, all right? But you'll be able to dig around. But you know, some of the data that I'm surfacing is coming from there. And I'm also going to surface some data from RUM Archive. Now, the good people at Akamai, good friends of ours, last year at a performance conference, this released this sort of trove of data, again, similar to HTTP Archive, but called RUM Archive. RUM, because obviously real user monitoring metrics, it's basically what they see on their networks, what people are doing and the data they're collecting from it. And I'll mention it when it comes from there. So since let me go back here. Like I mentioned, I'm a bit of a sports buff. You know, I played hockey, so I enjoyed that. I run football, I played basketball, I even played badminton. Not too much data there, but I did. So I'm going to sort of surface these numbers and explain where they're coming from and talk about how significant they are. So the first number I'm pulling up is 41.71%. Now, it's going to feel random, but I'll explain to you why. Now, that is the percentage of websites that have good core web vitals. What does that mean, Henri? Well, let me tell you. It means they have good largest contentful paint, good FID, which is first input delay, and good CLS, which is cumulative layout shift. So CLS is that sort of like bouncing page stability metric that I mentioned. Largest contentful paint, which I'll deep dive a bit again in a minute, is the one that's about visual completeness. And FID is sort of like an interactivity metric that's actually being sunset, but you know, I'll tell you why in a hot minute. But the 41.71% is a number you want to keep in mind, because when I pull this one up, that's what it's like for React sites. This is what the data tells us. All right. We're not making it up. It's just like, what's going on here? Oh, we're a React site. Okay, that's the percentage. So we are informed right away that there might be some challenges with React sites. And not saying that they're bad developers. We're not saying it's a bad framework. We're saying that this is what we're seeing on the network. All right, this is what's going on. It's like, hey, people are speeding. Well, that's what we're seeing, you know, as an officer. So this is the kind of data that we like to talk about because we want to make sure that people are kind of informed when they're picking their frameworks and whatnot, you know, because I've always said it's not necessarily like a bad framework or bad developer. There may be some oversights that they're not, realizing. Let's look at some more numbers. 53.54%. Well, that is the percentage of sites on the web that have good largest contentful paint. Now, LCP, largest contentful paint, is basically the largest image in your viewport, and we want it to load in 2.5 seconds or faster. All right, which means that the delta, which is, we'll say 46.5%, have mediocre or poor LCP or visual completeness, meaning that 2.5 seconds or longer, 46% of the sites are taking 2.5 seconds or longer to load, to display some completeness to the page. All right, I can get into more details, like 70% of the time the LCP is an image, so there's an image management issue, but that's a different story. That's a different meetup. You can still invite me for that. So, well, what does it say for React? 46.14%. Again, not saying that React is a bad framework, but this is what the data is telling us. Let's keep it moving. 75%. Well, that's the number of sites that have good CLS, cumulative layout shift. So 75% have a good index of page stability. All right, which is good because like I said, the page stability is pretty annoying, especially if you have ads coming in. You're like, okay, the page is loading. It says like, click here to get the information. And by the time you go click, the ad pops in and you're like, don't. And next thing you know, you're in that sort of like no person's land. But again, on React, it's 69.8%. So a little lower. Fine. Not drastically different, but still there. Now we're going to keep deep diving. 64.63%. That is sites that have good IMP. Now, what is IMP? It's called interactive to next paint. What is happening is that I'm not even going to talk about it, actually. There's another core vital or web vital called FID that everyone passes. And we're like, sort of like, 95%, 96% all the time. And as an instructor, sometimes you might be like, hey, everyone's got like high 90s on my test each and every time. So they're either cheating or I'm not a good instructor. Or I might be a good instructor, but something's wrong here. You know what I mean? So essentially, we have to let someone in. Is that me? Okay, no problem. So essentially, it's being replaced by INP, and basically Google essentially had realized that, okay, this original metric that we had, we may not have thought this through properly. And so they're coming up with this INP that had been in experimental stages for the last year. And about 2 months ago, they made it like, okay, the next year is going to be, we're giving everyone another year to sort of like work it out, but starting March 24, this is going to be an official web vital. All right. So that's what's happening in terms of like scores for the web with good IMP. And IMP is also an interactivity metric because, again, this is with regards to JavaScript and what's going on. Unfortunately, React is not even hitting 50% here. Yes, sir.
Can you explain what that is again? Interactive to next paint?
Yeah, interactive to next paint. Essentially, they felt like FID was not really describing or really getting a good sense of what was going on with the interactivity with the JavaScript, because it was basically calculating on the first click, and they realized there's a lot more going on beyond that click. And so they had to sort of like take a closer look at what they were measuring and monitoring, and interaction to next paint. Again, it's the idea like what is happening afterwards. And you know,
It's like the time from float to something happening.
afterwards, yeah, absolutely. Like it could get a little more detailed. I'd be happy to send you a link on that for sure. And in fact, if you go to, I bet you it's probably there. If you go to web.dev/INP, it'll probably pop up. And there's a bunch of videos too, which I'd be happy to share. Because they realize this is, you know, with JavaScript, you get into the weeds a bit more. There's so much going on. And they felt that FID was not describing the actual process. But yeah, I'd be happy to share some links. And again, this all about what we saw right there with INP was all about JavaScript. And, you know, the challenge with JavaScript has been that we have discovered over the last, you know, we'll say, God, like 5, 6, 7 years, that, you know, it has provided a lot of the dynamic, the interactivity that we need. So we've gone from like, oh, let's create some, you know, interactive sites to just like, with some JavaScript, to just like dumping it all in. And as long as the site does what we want it to do, we're fine. But the challenge has been that we're actually dumping a lot more JavaScript than we need, and it's creating these sort of like bottlenecks left and right. And I'll be able to show like some examples, hopefully. And that's why there's been this kind of like pushback left and right from particular people who are like, hey, listen, we have too much JavaScript. You know, we need to manage it a bit more. You have some frameworks that are like trying to promote like the Zero.js, when, you know, that might be a bit of an extreme there as well. But the idea is to always understand what you're doing and be able to manage the amount of JavaScript and really resources in general. But I tend to sort of like talk about the JavaScript because it has a very toxic impact on devices and the experience. So let's look at some more numbers. And this is JavaScript related here. So at the median, this is 555, I was going to say 0.49 kilobytes. This is what we're sending in terms of JavaScript at the median on the web right now. All right, that's what the data is showing us. The data is also showing us that this is what React is sending down the wire. All right, so we are literally doubling the amount of JavaScript on a most basic React app. And again, this is the kind of, you know, data we want you to see because it ends up having a bit of impact. Here's another set of numbers that I'd like to share each and every time. Yeah, date format. I don't know if that's European or American, but that's November 2016. And this is roughly the time where mobile, the web was being accessed on mobile more than desktop for the first time ever. That was in 2016 fall. And it has not turned back, and it basically never will. All right, just kind of keep that in mind. And it's really important because, you know, once you start to understand that, you know, some people kind of argue with the idea that it's a mobile first world. It's close because you're talking about particular areas of the world where, you know, their first contact with the web is through mobile and a very inexpensive device at that, you know, and you may hear some people say like, oh, the median device is this, is this. If you look at the global, on the global level, it absolutely is, you know, true that the median device is very, very moderate in cost and power. Okay. And here's some more numbers, 41 and 59%. And this is data from the RUM archive, the good people at Akamai. And that's to show that 41% of people generally on the Akamai platform are iPhone users, and 59% are devils, aka Android. Okay, Android users, shout out. But this is, again, super duper important. Two reasons. I see some Android users here, having a good chuckle. Super duper important because traditionally, and this is like very verifiable, Android devices are not as powerful as iPhone. That's like, boom. Like, I have an iPhone 7 Plus, by the way. This would be a premium Android device. All right. And on top of that, parsing tends to be 2.5 to 3.3 times worse on mobile in general. All right. So you add the fact that, there's a split, and this is like all the phones. So we know iPhones are probably going to be all right. Androids, they're going to potentially, struggle with some content. I'll share a very quick stat. This is an older one, but I remember just being blown away by this. So Facebook, ye of great research, by the way, over there. That engineering team was like heavy duty. And they found out that, like, again, Android phones, outpaced iPhone sales, time over time. And at some point, I think the Android community made this decision to lower the cost of devices for greater, sales and, access and whatnot. And what they were doing was, instead of just like, every year you're like, oh, some new devices, 2016, 2017, 2018, whatever. But you would buy a 2015 phone with like 2008 parts. It was just new. All right. And that was their way to create that sort of access, like $100 phone, $150 phones. They'll give you a brand new screen and all that stuff. But the guts, 2008. And they actually had this library called, I think, Facebook Year Class or something like that. So when they found out it was like a 2000, say 15, 16 phone, they would scale back, the kind of content that they served, because they knew that device would not be able to handle like modern developer content going down the wire. So, they're still out there, by the way, and the one fascinating part, man, I'm going to talk forever. I'm sorry. But the one fascinating part is like, Android phones would just always remain on the network. Again, this is the kind of stuff we see because, in these markets, they're being passed down. So you're constantly, imagine like IE5 always being around and you're just like, oh, where is this going to disappear? That's what was going on with Android devices. They're always finding the way to stick around the network. So anyways, super important. Now, I'm going to share with you another bit of data, or it's not so much data, a concept that is actually very real called rage clicking, all right? They couldn't figure out what to call it, but this is what made it work, rage clicking. Now, this is actually a real point of data that they're keeping an eye on. And the true definition is something like, the amount of times you hit a particular area, in succession within this kind of time, but they're tracking people's frustrations almost with trying to, hitting a button and trying to get the feedback that they want, click, buy, I don't know, Taylor Swift tickets, and nothing's happening. And they're getting really angry, but rage clicking is something that they're following. Akamai, Google, and a bunch of other performance-minded organizations. Now, that's why, ultimately at Catchpoint, like I said, we do a lot of things there, a lot of monitoring, but we have a solution we call web page test. And I want to see if I could do like a super duper quick not so much demo, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys what it looks like. Because we measure, all right? And, you know, you will improve nothing if you don't measure. You know, that's something like I have a Garmin watch that I don't need to charge at night, Apple Watch users. And I track my data all the time, sleep data, run data, you know, as you start on the screen. I know you're going to say something.
Oh, I have a garbage.
Yay, Garmin besties. Okay, so I'm going to see, hopefully this is going to work. And Zoom people, I'm sorry.
I think it's based on.
Which one, Garmin? I don't know. I don't know if it is. I'll just kind of like, I'll go get drunk and just cry. Let me see if I can do this. So, oh no, share, new share. I'm gonna see if I can. This is the one I want. No, I'm looking for this. Okay, I want to make sure this works. I'm sorry. Oh. Oh, this is what I'm sharing, I think. Is this what I'm sharing? What are you seeing? Okay, so I don't know if this is what I really wanted, but okay, I know what I'll do. Okay, so this is a typical, I'm going to start it here. So when we do a trace in web page test, we'll have something like this, right? So this is a typical performance summary, we call it. And the reason core vitals exists is because, you know, you may have like some SEO people and like sometimes like some CMOs, like marketing team folks who are kind of like somewhat literate in performance, but they don't necessarily want to deep dive, right? But we'll give you some of the metrics you need to know about. I mean, like things like time to first byte, if anyone's familiar with that, like that's basically like how quickly you can get like that first bit of byte down the wire, because that's also very important. That will indicate to you a bunch of different things, mostly back end. There was a back end person in here, I think. I forget who. Okay, cool. There you go. So, you know, then we'll look at paint metrics, like the first contentful paint. But one of the big ones, like I said, the largest contentful paint we've surfaced, the CLS and the total blocking time, which is again sort of like JavaScript related, because too much JavaScript will end up sort of like choking up the device and certainly the main thread. And that ends up in what we call blocking time, where it's like you cannot do anything. You could hit that buy Swift tickets button, but nothing's going to happen. Now, here's the funny part. This is actually the React Rally site. And I was pleasantly surprised for a few reasons, but I will say this much as well. This is their waterfall. All right. So by the way, if you want to ever begin to understand performance, you have to sort of like be waterfall literate, you know, roughly. And here their waterfall, is this working? Maybe am I, okay, it is, sorry. So their waterfall was pretty damn small, pardon my German. You know, we have this saying, the quickest request is the one that's never made, and they're not making a lot here. So, which is why they have some pretty good metrics and some results. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's in the green. So that's another good lesson. Like the more requests you make, the likelihood of your app or site taking longer to load is going to happen. Okay, so they have like, man, like a dozen here. I don't know what it was. But I could also see like they have some images that were pretty good and they look like they weren't really super optimized. I could tell right here, yeah, they're almost like 2 megs. But the point is, this is the kind of data that we look at a lot. All right. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that the the LCP is at a 70% rate made up of images. So quite often, if you don't have decent image management, you can start to run into some issues with visual completeness and like page weight, because that's data, and data quite often can cost, maybe not you in America, but in other parts of the world, like data comes at a bit of a cost. And in fact, if you're traveling, you know, if you're going to Europe, they're not playing over there. $7, £7 a megabyte, whatever. But, this is the kind of stuff that we look at. I think I have a couple other ready-made, no, well, that's a landing page, ready-made data points here. I think we saw this already. But regardless, Core Web Vitals, important because it really kind of summarized the idea of a page's sort of like fitness in 3 metrics. Chances are if you get those 3 Core Web Vitals right, you probably have a decent page, one that delivers at least decent user experience. Let me get back to my deck and we can sort of wrap this up. And I just want to apologize if this is taking too much time here. And play. I know there's a play button here somewhere. Oh, there it is. So I mentioned measuring.
So we're not seeing it now, we're seeing your.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you. This. Is that the right one?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, you can't improve what you can't measure. That's bottom line. We try to promote performance literacy, but at the very least, keeping performance in mind, because again, generally sites are not doing well. What's that bag company, that colorful bag company that's up the street from here? Someone must know it. No, it's like it's something. Everything's yeah, everything's colorful. Yeah. So when I came here for Remix, literally it was in our bags or speaker bags, whatever. And I loved it. It was like this little fanny pack and it had a QR code. I'm like, oh, let me check it out. And I threw it to web page test. It was actually sending 20 megs of content, like dead serious. It was 20 megabytes of content. It was like 13 megs of images, 5 megs of JavaScript. It was out of control. But these are the things you'll never realize until you do like the quickest test. And again, likely an oversight, but it's sitting around. You know what I mean? And people are eating 20 megs every time they land on the page. And new users, obviously, there's probably some caching involved. Anyhow, I want to thank everyone for sitting through that. I tend to try to sort of like talk through concepts, explain things, have fun. But at the end of the day, I think it is about sort of remembering the small things just to check. You're on your way out your house, you got your keys, you look good, you smell good, same thing. You want to deploy, hey, make sure everything's cool. You're not blowing people's data plans. You're coming in like at a nice manageable amount of JavaScript, because again, you need it for some interactivity, but there are ways of sort of like moving files around to make sure it's not creating any kind of bottlenecks and things like that. You can find me again on socials right here. I tend to be the most active on Twitter, despite everything. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm around. Merci. Okay, stop share, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, bingo. And I'll do that. And I'll do that. I didn't realize there was a clicker here already. I could use that one. Okay, boom, boom. Was that?
It's a nice clicker.
Oh, it's like the same one, super cheap.
Is it USB? I don't have USB.
Oh, do you want me to leave this here?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm moving.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It's I'm actually trying to get this different one.
myself. So there'll be some audio coming in. I think it's focaccia. Yeah. I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. Let's see. There it goes. Okay, I am Cecelia Martinez. I'm a developer advocate at Ionic. You can feel free to connect with me. I am at Cecelia Creates on Twitter or X, whatever. I'm not going to call anything else. And GitHub as well. Tend to be pretty active on there. I've had a Twitter account since for 14 years or something, and I don't know. I keep trying the new ones, and they never stick. I always come back. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just linkedin.com/in/Cecelia Martinez. So I've been, before Ionic, I have worked at other open source developer tools like Replay and Cypress. Jess and I worked there together as well. I am also a bootcamp grad, and so there's some bootcamp students here. I attended Georgia Tech for their full stack software engineering program. In 2019, I first learned how to make websites in high school, making custom LiveJournal layouts with HTML and CSS. And then in college, learned WordPress and kind of always had a bug for it on the side, but had careers in journalism and finance before making the jump full-time into tech. So yeah, I also volunteer with Women Who Code, and I'm the chapter head for Out in Tech Atlanta, which supports the LGBTQ+ community in tech. So I talk about all of those things on my various socials. So yeah, so today I'm here to talk about Ionic and React. Just to kind of read the room, how many of y'all already know about Ionic? Have used it before? Pretty comfortable. That's what I figured. Okay. How many of you have used React and are comfortable with React? Less hands, little hands. Okay, cool. All right, sweet. So yeah, so I'll go super quickly through Ionic, since most of you already know it. Essentially, it's cross-platform mobile app development SDK. It allows you to create apps for mobile web, PWA, Android, and iOS from the same code base. It's all built on web technologies so that you can leverage your existing skill set, existing teams, existing libraries, technologies that you prefer to use in order to build for multiple platforms. The Ionic framework, which is what we all call Ionic, but really it's the framework, is a UI component library. So it gives you a library of more than 100 UI building blocks that have native look and feel. So when you're building for mobile, you can leverage these components that are designed specifically for mobile experiences. You can integrate them into any type of framework. And we're talking about React today, but it's supported with Angular, React, and Vue. Or also you can use it with vanilla JavaScript. So you can kind of pick and choose which components that you'd like to use in any type of JavaScript application. And they do have adaptive styling. What this means is that the components know, hey, I'm on iOS, I need to look like this. Hey, I'm on Android, I need to look like that. So that you don't have to do that styling specifically for each platform. And you also, it has built-in support for theming, dark mode, and as well as gestures and animations, so that as you swipe through pages, it has that same iOS and Android experience that you would expect, but all using web technologies. So that's Ionic framework, that's the UI component library. Capacitor, which goes hand in hand with Ionic, is what actually allows it to run on native platforms. So this is what allows you to take what is essentially a web app and build it for Android and for iOS. So it's not only the runtime that lets you create those native binaries, it is also our plugin directory that just gives you access to, gosh, there's 300 now plugins for Capacitor that add native functionality to your apps. So when you need to do things like use camera, use file picker, access location, Capacitor gives you plugins that you can, or functions essentially that you can call from your JavaScript in order to access that device functionality. And we create the bridge in order to actually connect to that on your iOS and Android app. So It has quite a bit of usage. I think it's like 15% of the apps in Google Play and 9% of the apps in the Apple App Store are actually built with Ionic and Capacitor. And yeah, so it has a CLI that you can leverage. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But let's dig into Ionic React. So I mentioned that Ionic works with multiple frameworks. Angular is the OG, the first one. Most people who have used Ionic probably have used it with Angular, but we also do have kind of like first line support for React and for Vue. So really Ionic React is just Ionic plus React. At the end of the day, you're actually still building a React application, which makes it very different from other cross-platform React frameworks such as React Native. So React Native, it sounds like you think it would be a React app, but it's a different framework. So when you want to do things like deploying to web, or if you want to use a JavaScript React library that you're used to using for web apps, you don't have access to the same ecosystem of tools that you do for your regular React web apps. With Ionic, you do. So you have more than, the same kind of React UI components that are mobile optimized. We try not to reinvent the wheel. So like I said, it's just React. So React DOM, React Router DOM, React Router are all built in, and that is what's under the hood when you're using the Ionic routers and the rendering, because we want it to work as seamlessly as possible and not add any additional complexity to the framework that you're using. Again, at the end of the day, it's just React. This means that you can also use any existing React tooling and libraries that you already use. So if you have like an animation library that you like, any kind of anything really, like anything that you can use with a React app, you can also use with Ionic, because again, at the end of the day, it's just React. So we have added support for Vite. That was in Ionic CLI version 7. I'm not sure what version of Ionic that was added in. So now whenever you start a new Ionic React application, it is built with Vite, which is great. I love Vite, it's very performant. But it does also have support for the create React app or React scripts build tools as well. So I mentioned that there's Ionic React Router. So it is using React Router under the hood, and you do have access to the React Router like methods and everything that you would need to access the React Router itself. But Ion React Router component works alongside an Ion Router outlet component that provides a container for the routes that are going to render your Ionic pages. So Ion React apps use this concept of an Ion page component, and with that works hand in hand with the router to make sure that your page transitions work properly as you're navigating between pages. And it also allows for stack navigation, so you can do things like go back and kind of have that history track. So you'll always want to make sure that you're using an Ion page component in conjunction with the router so that everything works properly. When it comes to navigation, you can use a router link attribute on things like there's buttons, there's like floating action buttons. There's a couple of different components that have a built-in router link attribute that you can pass through the route that you want to navigate to. You can also use the link component that's provided by React Router. So you can put a link component within any other component. For some reason, like if you have something that you want an image to navigate and an image doesn't have that router link, you can use the link component inside of alongside that image in order to make that a navigable component. If push comes to shove, you can also use history.push. I did not mean to make a pun there, but it worked out. Yeah. So history.push is also provided by React Router. It essentially allows you to, like within an on-click event handler, use history.push and then push the route that you'd like to go to next. So again, you can also leverage that for navigation if needed. I personally feel like if a component doesn't have a router link, you probably shouldn't use it for navigation, but I like to keep things simple. And we'll take a look at some of these examples in some code as well. So a quick note about React lifecycle. So React lifecycle methods are available to you if you want to access them, but they may not fire as expected. So Ionic, we are using React under the hood, but we're also doing a little bit of like magic on top of it when it comes to navigating between different types of views. So for example, if you have tabs and views that like you're navigating between, you may expect like a component did mount to fire, but we may actually have like that component still mounted in the background as like a menu comes over it. So then when it comes back into view, that React lifecycle event may not actually fire the way that you expect. Because of this, we provide Ionic React lifecycle methods that you can access instead. So these are ion view will enter, ion view did enter, ion view will leave, and ion view did leave. And this has to do with essentially the component that when the component routing like to and from is actually animated into view. And again, like the biggest example I can think of is when you have a mobile app and you have a little hamburger icon, you click on it, the menu slides into view and it slides out of view. So if you are thinking of like a traditional web app and you're in that kind of that same paradigm, you may think, oh, okay, like there's a new view that's come in, that background component like unmounted, but we don't actually always do that. So we keep it going in the background. So if you have something where when it comes back into view, you want to hook to fire in order to update that view, that may not work as expected. So you're going to want to use the Ionic React lifecycle methods instead of like the traditional React lifecycle methods that you may think of. Or if you want to use the regular ones, just validate that it's going to fire when you expect. Any questions there? That one kind of, okay. Lifecycle methods are just like always tough for me. So this is a way to kind of abstract on top of that. So as long as you have something that's entering or leaving, you can hook into that instead. All right, so to get started with Ionic React, a couple different ways that you can do this to create a new app. My favorite, honest, like I'm like loving the VS Code extension for Ionic. I don't know how many of y'all have used that before, but it's my new favorite thing. So with the Ionic VS Code extension, you can create new projects, you can like build, you can launch in iOS and Android simulators, you can do all kinds of things. So that is one option that you can just choose your framework, any targets that you'd like to use for it. And then also if you'd like to use a template and create a project right in VS Code and it'll scaffold everything out for you. You can also use the app wizard. So the app wizard is actually a GUI or a GUI on our Ionic framework website. So you can create an account on there. You can go in, you can connect to like your GitHub repo and it'll create it for you based on the app wizard. Most people will probably use the Ionic CLI. And so if you like a more visual route, you can go with those. Otherwise, the Ionic CLI is the most robust kind of way to start out an application. So you can install it with npm install that globally, and then Ionic start. You can just run Ionic start and it'll walk you through kind of like a CLI options and ask you what framework you want. Or you can just add onto the command. So this is Ionic start. My app is the name of the app. Tabs is the template. So Ionic provides some starter templates for you, and just passing that -- type React will make it Ionic React app. And then Ionic serve will start your server. You do have some implementation options if you want to build with Ionic React. The first is to start a new app from scratch, which is the 3 methods I just showed. You can use one of those, scaffold out something brand new, and start building. The Ionic, SDK is free and open source, and so you can use it for any type of production, non-production applications. If you ever wanted to get started with mobile, and that's a really good way to start building out an app. You could also add Ionic components to an existing React app. So if you already have an existing React application and you want to turn it into a mobile app, but there are some areas of the app that don't look and feel native that you would want to integrate some components into it, you can do that. Essentially, you're going to add the Ionic library. There's some configuration that you have to do in order to configure the Ionic components, and then you can incorporate those into an existing app. Third option is also, we're seeing this increasingly as an option of people taking this, where they have an existing React web app. They decide not to use Ionic components. They keep their own components, they handle the styling themselves, and then they use capacitor only in order to actually build for native. So you can take an existing web app, you can essentially wrap it in a native application to ship it to iOS and Android app stores without actually using our components. So again, you want to make sure it looks and feels like how a user would expect for a mobile application, but that is another option that you can do as well. Nice thing about that is you can do it with any framework app. So you could take a solid app or a svelte app and then just wrap it with capacitor and ship it to iOS and Android. So, all right, any questions on that? I'm going to just walk through some example here. question. Okay. So we'll make this a lot bigger here. So this is it's essentially just like a demo app. I'm going to go ahead and serve it so we can see. This one is already mobile. Okay, so I hope hopefully that's big enough. This is just like a super very straightforward app. So we have some tabs here on the bottom. Essentially, I'm loading in some dummy data, as you can see, or mock data, sorry. And then it has a little about tab that has no information on it, but just to show you can navigate between pages. And you'll see the kind of heading that's happening as I scroll that's expected for iOS. That's a kind of collapsible toolbar. We have some cards, we have some titles, we have some images, and this has search functionality. So I can, search terms and it'll automatically update with the items that just has that search term in it. So this also does have theme support for light and dark mode. This looks so small. Where is it? Okay, so I always have dark mode, but you can also see this is what it looks like on light mode for the browser. And we're just able to kind of scroll through all the items. So that's what it looks like on mobile web. Again, this is a web app that I'm running right now. It has built with React components. So let's take a look at the code. I'm going to close that to start. I'm going to close this. And control. And I'm gonna make this bigger. Okay, is that better to see? Okay, cool. Quick note, I mentioned the Ionic VS Code extension. That's this icon here. You can add it right in VS Code. It gives me some options, like I could build my project, I could sync it, I can open it in Xcode, which is for building iOS applications. I can add the Android project. The nice thing too is I have access here to capacitor plugin directory. So I can come in here, I can see like what plugins I have available. I can also search for any new capacitor or plugins that I want to add to my app and then install them directly into my application. So if I wanted to find, like I mentioned, like a share, like the share kind of, so the share API, like that, whenever you hit something to share it and like it has like, oh, my Twitter and my text messages and everything, there's a share API out for capacitor and I could just install this and I could start using it in my app. So this kind of helps you find community and also official plugins that you can add into your application. So we're take a look at the code here, and you're going to notice pretty quickly when we look at source that it looks a lot just like a regular React application. So we do have our index HTML that's just going to have our root div. Then we have our main.tsx, which then is using React, and it's literally just React in order to render our app component. And our app.tsx component, this is where we're starting to see some Ionic magic happen. I'm going to go through the imports first. So we are importing redirect and route, and these are coming from React Router DOM. So those are coming from the built-in React Router DOM. I'm importing a couple of different components here from the UI library. Those are coming from Ionic React, things like icon label, and also the router that we'll be using. I'm also importing Ion React Router, which is a component that allows me to set up my Ionic route specifically. I'm importing some icons. So in addition to the UI components that are made available for you, we also have a library of icons that are automatically built into your Ionic apps. These are everything like search, arrows, Twitter, anything like there's like, I don't know, like a bunch of them, like a lot of them. And they also have support for different types like outline, like shadow, different versions of them. And you can also color them as well. So that's a nice kind of UI add-in. So I'm importing the help and the search icon to use for my tabs. And then I'm importing my pages. So I have a search page and an about page for my app. Those are the two tabs that I was tabbing between. This is automatically imported. This is some CSS that's used by Ionic. And then we have a setup Ionic React function here. Again, that's scaffolded automatically for me. And here is where I get to my actual component. So this is my app component with all of my components that I'm using for my UI. So you'll see at the root, there's an Ion app component. That's always going to be at the root of your app component. And then underneath that, we have the Ion React router. So our Ion React router, again, like initializes our router. And then we have our router outlet component underneath that. And that's where we're going to define our individual routes. So we'll see here that we have this route component. The first one is a path to search. And within that, we are passing through the search component, which is my search page. I then have a route for about. And then I also have a redirect that whenever it's like the default route should always redirect to search. So that should look very similar to React Router if you've used it before. It's just kind of Ionic handling that with its own Ion Router outlet. Then I have my components for my tab bar at the bottom. So again, if we go back to the app, we see these like search tab and we have search and about. So those are just the tabs that are designated as the two different pages in my app. That's also where I'm using my icons. So I could change these icons out, you know, there's things like triangle, circle, whatever it may be, but I'm just passing through the name here. So like if I wanted to, the nice thing about if you're using VS Code is like you can just start typing and you can see all the options for you. So I have triangle, outline sharp, train. I can make this a train if I wanted to. And I could save that and it's now a train. So those are all built in. They'll automatically import as well. So you can leverage those throughout your UI. I'll change this back for now, even though the train is probably more fun. And then, yeah, so that is like the essential function of my application. I want to take a look at the search page really quick, because that is where you're going to see more of the React aspect of it. And I can show you that it is really just React. So this is the search page that I was importing, and this is the default route that we have. Again, I'm importing some components that I'm using for my UI. I'm importing my data.json. That's where I have all of that lorem ipsum data that I was pulling in. And I'm also just importing my CSS file. And here I'm using use state from React. So for my state management, I am just using React's built-in use state in order to create those items. Initially, I'm using my data.items from my data.json file. I have some functions here to handle my search. So I'm going to skip over handle key up just for a second and go to handle search. So for handle search, this is linked to my Ion search bar component. So this like lovely search bar that I have here that just kind of just works and automatically has like the X and the icon and everything. That is just like a built-in Ionic component. I didn't have to style any of that or deal with any of it. It's literally just Ion search bar. And connected to that here, I have my on Ion input, which is an event handler for whenever the input changes. I'm running my handle search method. And then for on key up, I'm handling if it's an enter key. And all I'm doing is I'm just resetting, you know, my state to be whatever the search to filter the items to match that search query. Again, this is all React. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and here I'm mapping through and I'm using Ion card header, card title. I have no like custom components. Everything that I'm using is Ionic provided by it. I didn't have to style anything except for my Flexbox, which we all have to do with layout. Sorry, it is what it is. We had to do some CSS. The last thing I want to mention is this handle key up. So you'll notice that I have a handle key up method that if the event key is enter, then I'm calling a keyboard.hide method. This keyboard is coming from capacitor. So this is required for when you actually have the app itself. So, you know, you click on search, your keyboard pops up, your native keyboard. When I hit enter, I want that keyboard to go away. I don't want to have to click anywhere else. I don't want to have to like swipe it down. So this is a method provided by the capacitor keyboard package that gives me access to that native keyboard so that I can make sure that it hides properly whenever I hit enter. If I don't have that, then I'll have to click out and I'll have to like do that manually. So yeah.
Is that making a universal keyboard? So if I call keyboard hide in web, Android, and iOS.
Yeah, so capacitor is designed to be cross-platform. Yes, exactly. So it'll work across both Android, iOS. Right. Exactly. Yep. So yeah, so last thing I want to do, I know we're getting close on time, is I want to just show you what this looks like when an actual iOS device. So back in my Ionic VS Code extension, the process that you would go through is you would do a production build of your application. This essentially just creates that minimized web build that you would do if you were going to deploy it to a web app. It should be pretty quick, even though we're on conference Wi-Fi because I'm using Beat. And then we're going to hit sync. What that does is it takes my web build and it syncs it up to actual iOS code. This is what allows me to run this on an actual iOS simulator. Now, right from the extension, I can go ahead and click run here. And I have my iPhone 14 Pro simulator. What this is going to do is it's creating a native iOS binary, the actual like IPA file. It's running Xcode build in order to do that. So it's running that native command under the hood for me without me having to actually open Xcode myself. Gonna launch it on the simulator. And we can see that it looks like, you know, similar to the web, but like a little bit different. It's because it's designed to be here for the simulator on an actual iOS. So I can scroll through my options. I can tab back and forth. And again, when I hit search, my keyboard pops up. I can type it in. I can hit return and the keyboard goes away. So yeah, so it's a real native app like iOS binary with that expected native functionality that you'd want from an actual app. So, all right. If you do have any questions or you know, kind of some next steps for you, we have a forum.ionicframework.com that you can ask any questions. Again, Ionic SDK is free and open source, so you can start it right away. We also have a Discord that you can come and join and chat with us and share what you're working on and get like talk to all of our Ionic developer experts and ionic.io/docs. There's also some cards kind of like around if you come by the booth that has some information and feel free to grab some stickers. So yeah, I'll be around if y'all have any questions. So thank you.